The scent of motor oil and burnt rubber clung to the walls of Carter's Auto Repair, a shop that had stood for 43 years against time, against rust, against everything but the corruption that had swallowed Milbrook whole. Inside, beneath a lifted truck, Harold Carter lay on his back, wrench in hand, his 72-year-old hands still steady despite the ache in his joints. The engine above him hummed low, like a sleeping animal, waiting for his touch to bring it back to life. This shop was his legacy, built with his own 2 hands after Vietnam, after burying his wife, after a lifetime of fighting battles he thought were behind him. He was wrong. The bell above the office door chimed. Harold didn't look up. He already knew who it was. "Be right with you," he called out, his deep voice calm, controlled, as he tightened a stubborn bolt. The voice that answered dripped with amusement. "Take your time, old man. We've got all day." Harold's breath slowed. He wiped his hands on a rag and sat up, squinting at the men standing in his garage. Officer James Blake. 6'2", blonde, blue-eyed, and built like a linebacker. The self-appointed warlord of Milbrook's police force. Flanking him, 2 more officers, Thompson and Walker, muscle-wrapped in polyester uniforms and bulletproof arrogance. This wasn't a friendly visit. Harold sighed. He'd been expecting this. Blake sauntered forward, running a finger along the hood of a 2015 Toyota Camry, examining the dust like he was appraising a slab of meat. "Nice operation you've got here, Carter." Blake's voice was smooth, mocking. "Been here, what, 40 years?" Harold didn't blink. 43. Blake whistled low, shaking his head. "Damn. That's a long time to run a business in this town. Must be doing something right." Harold knew the game. He'd seen the same intimidation tactics in Vietnam, in alleyways where local warlords shook down merchants, where power wasn't held by those who earned it, but by those willing to take it at gunpoint. "I do honest work for honest pay," Harold said evenly, crossing his arms. "Always have." Blake smiled. "See, that's the thing." He leaned against the car's fender, his voice dropping lower. "Times are changing. Costs are going up, insurance, inspections, safety regulations. It's getting real hard for small businesses to stay afloat, don't you think?" The implication was clear as day. Harold let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of it before he finally spoke. "I manage just fine." Blake's smile disappeared. His hand dropped to his belt where his holster sat, heavy and waiting. Thompson stepped forward, voice lower, sharper. "Nobody's saying you're not a good businessman, Mr. Carter. We're just here as community liaisons, making sure local businesses have the support they need." Harold's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what that meant. He'd heard whispers of this happening to other businesses, especially black-owned ones. A protection fee. Pay up, or things go wrong. Harold exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to stay relaxed. "I don't need any support." Blake clicked his tongue. $500 a month. His voice wasn't a request. "Think of it as insurance. Make sure nothing bad happens to your business." Harold's hands curled into fists. "No." Blake raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you should sleep on it," he murmured. "Think about what could happen to a place like this. Cars are complicated machines. Fires start. Windows break." He leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Would be a shame if something happened and emergency services were delayed in responding." Harold felt it then. The old anger rising. The same rage he'd buried in the jungles of Vietnam when he'd watched young men die for lies. He thought of his father, who'd taught him that a man who gives in to bullies loses something he can never get back. Harold straightened, locked eyes with Blake, and spoke. "Get out of my shop." Blake's expression darkened. He stepped closer, using his height to loom over the older man, trying to force him to back down. Harold didn't flinch. "You're making a mistake, old man," Blake hissed. "A big one." "The only mistake," Harold said, voice steady as steel, "was thinking you could intimidate me." Blake's hand tightened on his holster. Harold held his ground. Then Blake exhaled through his nose, slowly stepping back. "Let's go, boys," he said over his shoulder. "Mr. Carter needs time to reconsider his position." At the door, Blake paused, and when he turned, his smile was gone. "Remember what I said about fires," he murmured. "They start so easily in places like this." Harold watched them leave. Waited until their patrol car disappeared down the street. Then and only then did he let himself exhale. Harold closed the shop late, double-checked every lock, every security camera, every emergency backup he had. The neighborhood was too quiet. He wasn't imagining it. He saw them. 3 figures, across the street, watching, waiting, out of uniform. Instead of showing fear, Harold walked calmly to his truck, drove home like it was any other night. But the next morning, when he pulled up to his shop, his stomach dropped. Every window shattered, the bay doors spray-painted. And inside, Harold felt his blood turn to fire. Tools smashed, equipment destroyed, and on his workbench a dead rat, a note pinned to its chest. "Next time it's you." Harold stood in the middle of the wreckage of his life's work. His hands shook, not with fear, with cold, familiar clarity. The same clarity he'd felt in the jungle when his unit had been pinned down, outnumbered, bleeding out but still standing, his fingers clenched. He was allowed 1 phone call, and he knew exactly who to call. The phone rang 3 times before it was answered. Despite the distance, despite the encryption scrambling the connection, Harold knew that voice anywhere. "Dad?" Harold exhaled. "Son," he said quietly, "I need your help." Silence. Then Damen Carter's voice changed, cold, deadly, like a weapon being drawn. "Tell me everything." The line went dead. Harold Carter set the phone down, his hand steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. He didn't need to say more. He knew his son. Damen Carter didn't react to threats. He eliminated them. 4,000 miles away, inside a classified military facility somewhere in the Middle East, Colonel Damen Carter, callsign Ghost, stood motionless, his piercing gaze locked on a row of surveillance feeds. The mission before him, a high-value cartel target extraction, was nearly complete. The air inside the tactical command center was thick with tension as a countdown timer ticked down to 0. His team, hand-picked operators, some of the most lethal soldiers in the world, moved like shadows on a battlefield, retrieving the target without leaving a single trace. Silent, precise, lethal. That was how Damen operated. The comms line in his earpiece crackled. Primary objective secured, no resistance. Exfil in 90 seconds. Damen exhaled slowly. Then, his secure line buzzed. A call from his father. He already knew. Without hesitation, Damen stepped back from the monitors, his posture shifting from tactical command mode to something else. Something far more dangerous. He answered, and the moment he heard Harold's voice, the war began. Damen listened without a word as his father described what had happened. The extortion attempt, the threats, the vandalism. The arrest. That was the moment Damen's fury turned cold. "They put hands on you?" His voice dropped, sharp as a blade against stone. "Didn't give them the excuse they wanted," Harold said evenly. "But I'm sitting in a cell, son. And these men, they're not just dirty cops. They've been running this racket for years." Damen inhaled slowly, forcing his heartbeat to remain steady. He knew men like Officer James Blake, knew their kind too well. The kind of coward that hid behind a badge, that abused power because they thought they were untouchable. They weren't, and Blake was about to learn that the hard way. "Sit tight, Dad," Damen said, his voice ice cold. "I'm on my way." Click. Captain Sarah Williams, Damen's second-in-command, was waiting for him when he stepped out of the command center. Her expression was unreadable, but her stance, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, told him everything. She knew. Knew this wasn't just another mission. This was personal. "You leave now. You're pulling yourself out of the op early," she said, watching him gather his gear. "We still have assets in the field, Carter, the chain of command." "This," Damen interrupted, slamming a loaded Sig Sauer P320 into its holster, "is a priority 0. Sarah hesitated. She'd seen Damen in combat, had fought beside him in places that didn't officially exist on a map, had watched him take out entire squads without breaking a sweat. But this was different. This wasn't mission protocol. This was vengeance. "Then let me go with you," she said. "You shouldn't do this alone." Damen shook his head. "You stay here. Finish the mission. I'll handle Milbrook." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then finally exhaled. "You're not coming back until it's done, are you?" Damen gave a small, cold smile. "Not until they wish they'd never been born." Then he was gone. Officer James Blake had just sat down with his morning coffee when his phone buzzed. The number was blocked. He frowned, answering reluctantly. "Yeah?" A voice, calm, lethal, and barely above a whisper, greeted him. "You should have picked a different town." The color drained from Blake's face. "Who the hell is this?" "You'll find out soon," Damen said. Click. Blake shot to his feet, knocking over his coffee, his gut twisted, his mind racing. "Carter." The old man had called someone. Blake turned, barking orders at the officers lounging in the break room. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" Thompson asked, flipping through a newspaper. Blake's grip tightened on his phone. "The kind that can bury us." He didn't know yet who Damen Carter was, but he was about to find out the hard way. By the time Damon's plane touched down on American soil, everything was already in motion. His network, his resources, his contacts. Milbrook's entire system of corruption was about to be torn apart from the inside out. Damen didn't go straight to the police station. No, that wasn't how he worked. He operated in shadows, striking from places they never saw coming. And James Blake? He was about to realize that some men aren't just enemies, they're nightmares. Milbrook, a town that had long rotted from the inside out, was about to witness something it had never seen before. A reckoning. Damen Carter didn't waste time. The second his boots hit the ground, he activated every contact, every resource, every shadow network he had access to. Within 2 hours, he knew everything. Who was dirty? Who was scared? Who would break first? Officer James Blake thought he had power. He didn't realize he had just made the worst enemy of his life. It started with a single leak. The FBI, the DOJ, Internal Affairs. All of them suddenly had Milbrook PD on their radar. Anonymous tips flooded their inboxes, financial records showing unexplained payments to officers. Body cam footage mysteriously lost, but now resurfacing. Confessions from terrified business owners describing years of extortion, threats, and brutality. By noon, federal agents were already making phone calls. By nightfall, there were whispers inside the department. Something was happening. Blake knew it. He could feel it. Inside the Milbrook police station, Blake sat in his office, sweating through his uniform. Every instinct screamed danger. "This is getting out of hand," Thompson muttered, pacing. "First, Carter doesn't pay. Now the feds are sniffing around. What if someone talks?" Blake slammed a fist on his desk. "Nobody talks," he snapped. "We handle this." Walker, their youngest recruit, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Carter's son is coming back. Damen Carter. Delta Force." Blake froze. For a second, nobody spoke. Then slowly, Blake leaned forward. "What did you just say?" Walker swallowed hard. "I looked him up. He's not just military. He's different." Blake snatched the folder from his desk, flipping through Damen Carter's file. Delta Force. Multiple classified operations. No official records on certain deployments. Nicknamed the Ghost for a reason. Blake's blood ran cold. He thought he was dealing with just another soldier's kid. Instead, he had poked a demon. That night, Blake found a playing card on his windshield, an ace of spades. No name, no note, just a message. "I know who you are. I'm coming." Blake grabbed his gun, his breathing uneven. "We need to find Carter. Now." Meanwhile, at the police station, the game had already shifted. Damen didn't come with a lawyer, he came with pressure. Before Blake could tighten his grip, Harold Carter's case mysteriously fell apart. The charges? Dropped. The paperwork? Misfiled. The arresting officers? Suddenly unavailable for questioning. By the time Harold walked out of his holding cell, the entire department was on edge. And as he stepped outside into the cool night air, his son was waiting for him. Damen stood leaning against a blacked-out SUV, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Harold smirked. "Took you long enough." Damen met his father's gaze. "It's handled." Harold exhaled. "That bad?" Damen's jaw tightened. "Worse." His father studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "What's next?" Damen's voice was calm, lethal, final. "Now we make them pay." Milbrook was about to change forever. Officer James Blake, the so-called king of his dirty little empire, still thought he had control. Still thought fear would keep people silent. He was dead wrong. Because Damen Carter wasn't just here to fight back, he was here to burn the entire system down. Blake's morning started like every other. A large coffee, a cocky grin, the same routine. Except today, something was off. As he pulled into his reserved parking spot outside the Milbrook police station, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Blake frowned but answered. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, deadly. "You should have walked away, Blake." Blake froze. Before he could respond, his car alarm started blaring. He jumped out, scanning the area. Nothing. Then he noticed something taped to the inside of his windshield. A single sheet of paper. In bold, capital letters, "We know everything." Underneath, a list of names, dirty cops, bribes, crimes, every single secret he'd buried. Blake's hand started to shake. This wasn't a warning. This was a declaration of war. Inside the station, the panic was already spreading. Reports were coming in. Anonymous leaks to the FBI. Whistleblowers inside City Hall flipping. Financial records appearing in reporters' inboxes. And then, the news story dropped. Rachel Turner, the town's last honest journalist, had just gone national. Her breaking report? Milbrook's police force, a criminal enterprise. The article exposed protection rackets, racial profiling, ties to a powerful criminal syndicate. By lunchtime, federal agencies had opened 6 separate investigations. By nightfall, people were talking. And once fear stops working, the whole house of cards falls. Blake stormed into the office of Chief William Anderson, slamming the report on his desk. "This is your fault," he growled. Anderson, a veteran in surviving political disasters, barely blinked. "This isn't a problem," the chief said coolly. "It's an opportunity." Blake's pulse hammered. "Are you kidding me? The feds are breathing down our necks. Carter is digging. We're running out of time." Anderson sighed. "Then it's time to shut him down permanently." Blake hesitated. "You mean?" The chief smirked. "Find someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty." The call was made within the hour. A contractor, no questions, no mistakes, no loose ends. The target? Damen Carter. The price? A lot. But when you're dealing with someone like the Ghost, you don't hire amateurs. You hire killers. But Damen already knew. The second the contract went out, his contacts at Langley flagged it. By the time the hired gun rolled into town, Damen was already waiting. The setup was flawless, a late-night alley, a meeting that never actually existed. The assassin walked in confident. He never walked out. The next morning, Blake found a new note on his desk. Strike 1, and this time his hands were shaking. Because for the first time in his life, James Blake finally understood what it meant to be hunted. Fear is a powerful thing. For years, Officer James Blake and his corrupt system ruled Milbrook with it. Business owners paid protection money, honest cops looked the other way. Nobody fought back. But now, fear had changed sides, and Blake was running out of time. Chief Anderson was done playing games. "This town is spiraling," Anderson said, pacing his office. "We either regain control or we're finished." Blake sat stiffly, his mind racing. "The feds are already watching us, Chief. We can't just—" Anderson slammed his fist on the desk. "Then we changed the game." Blake's stomach churned. Every instinct told him Damen Carter was 10 steps ahead, but Anderson had already decided. "Call Lynch." Blake went pale. "Lynch? You want to bring in the cartel?" Anderson's stare was ice cold. "If Carter wants a war, let's give him one." That night, a black SUV rolled into town. Inside sat Thomas Lynch, the most dangerous cartel figure nobody talked about. Lynch didn't operate like street-level thugs. He didn't wear gold chains or flaunt his power. He was a businessman, a silent enforcer behind police corruption across multiple states, and when he spoke, people listened. Anderson, Blake, and a few high-ranking officers met him in a secluded warehouse outside town. Blake swallowed hard. "We, appreciate you coming." Lynch lit a cigar, exhaling slowly. "I don't do favors. What do you need?" Anderson leaned forward. "We need Carter gone." Lynch smirked. "You mean the Ghost?" Blake stiffened. The fact that Lynch knew Damon's name sent a chill through him. Lynch tapped his cigar, his voice calm. "You don't just kill a man like that. You dismantle him. You make him suffer." Anderson hesitated. "Can you do it?" Lynch exhaled. "I already have a team in place." But while they were plotting his downfall, Damen Carter was already watching them. Using high-tech surveillance gear, Damen had been tracking their movements for days. And now, he finally had what he needed. Proof that the police force wasn't just corrupt, they were working with the cartel. Before Lynch could make his move, Damen struck first. At 3 a.m., silent shadows moved through Milbrook. Damon's team, a group of ex-operators he trusted with his life, executed the perfect takedown. Lynch's cartel enforcers? Neutralized. Anderson's top officers? Gone. The warehouse meeting spot? Sealed and surrounded. When Lynch finally realized what was happening, it was too late. The Ghost had set a trap, and they had walked straight into it. Blake woke up the next morning to find a photo waiting for him. A picture of Lynch, handcuffed and being loaded onto a federal transport. And below it, strike 2. Blake's hands trembled. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was the end. And Damen Carter? He was just getting started. James Blake had one choice left. Run or fight. And he was too stupid to run. The town was turning against him. The feds were closing in. And Damen Carter, he was hunting him. This was the endgame. Sitting in his patrol car, Blake's fingers tapped anxiously on the steering wheel. He stared at the photo on his dashboard. His daughter. He'd done all this for her. The bribes, the threats, the blood. And now he was losing everything. His phone buzzed. A blocked number. He answered. The voice was ice cold. "You're out of time." Blake's stomach twisted. It was Damen. "I can make this right," Blake stammered. "We can cut a deal." Click. The line went dead. Blake knew what that meant. There was no deal. No escape. Only consequences. By midnight, the final phase of Damen's plan was in motion. Using the evidence Blake himself had tried to destroy, Damen had leaked everything. FBI raids hit Milbrook City Hall. Federal agents locked down the entire police department. Corrupt officers were dragged out in handcuffs. And the people of Milbrook? They weren't afraid anymore. They cheered. Because for the first time in decades, the criminals in power were the ones being hunted. Blake made one final mistake. He ran. With a duffel bag full of cash and a gun tucked in his waistband, he sped toward the city limits. But at the last checkpoint, a lone figure stood in the road. Waiting. Damen Carter. Blake slammed on the brakes. He gripped his gun, heart pounding. "Don't do it," Damen warned, voice calm. Blake's mind raced. He could still win. He could shoot Carter, take out the one man who destroyed him, end this on his own terms. But before he could draw, boom. A single shot. And Blake collapsed, his kneecap shattered. Damen stepped forward, gun still smoking. "Not so fun being the one bleeding, is it?" Damen murmured. Blake gasped in pain, his world fading to black. The last thing he heard, FBI sirens. By sunrise, it was over. Blake was in federal custody. Chief Anderson was gone. The cartel's influence was dead. And Milbrook? It was finally free. As Damen stood outside his father's shop, he let out a slow breath. The war was over. For now. Blake sat alone in his prison cell, staring at the walls. A letter arrived. No return address. Shaking, he opened it. Inside, a single playing card, the ace of spades, and one handwritten note, strike 3. Blake's hands trembled. Because now, he finally understood. Some ghosts never stop hunting, and Damen Carter would always be watching. Milbrook was free, but corruption never dies. Damen Carter knew this. He'd seen it too many times. For every James Blake, there was another. For every Chief Anderson, there was a bigger monster pulling the strings. And just when he thought Milbrook was safe, the next threat arrived. 1 week later. Harold Carter stood outside his auto shop, arms crossed, watching as Milbrook began to heal. The streets were safer. The people walked without fear. And for once, there were no corrupt cops lurking in the corners. But as Harold leaned against his truck, enjoying the calm for the first time in months, a black SUV pulled up. Tinted windows, unmarked plates. Harold's gut twisted. This wasn't over. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Not a cop, not a thug. Something worse. A suit. Tailored, precise, corporate. "Mr. Carter," the man said smoothly. "My name is Vincent Kane. I represent certain interests that are quite displeased with recent events." Harold didn't move. "You FBI?" Kane smiled. "No, I work for a different kind of power." Harold's fists clenched. This wasn't over. It had never been over. Damen Carter was halfway across the country when his phone buzzed. "Unknown number," he answered. A voice, smooth, calm, and dangerous, spoke. "Colonel Carter, I'm Vincent Kane. I assume you're familiar with the concept of balance?" Damen's jaw tightened. "If you're calling me, it means you're scared." Kane chuckled. "No, Colonel, I'm just here to warn you." Damen said nothing. He let the silence do the talking. Kane continued. "Your little war in Milbrook, that was entertaining. But what you fail to understand is that you didn't destroy the system. You barely scratched it." Damen's grip on his phone tightened. Kane's voice turned colder. "You took out a corrupt mayor, a police chief, a few mid-level players. But the real power?" He paused. "We don't wear badges, Colonel. We wear suits." Damen's pulse remained steady. "I want you to understand something," Kane said. "You cost my employers a great deal of money. And now, they're coming for you." Damen exhaled slowly. Then he spoke, calm, deadly. "They already tried." Kane hesitated. "Excuse me, the mercenaries, the hit squads, the assassins." Damen's voice was ice. "They tried. They failed." Kane's tone sharpened. "This isn't a game, Carter." Damen smiled darkly. "You're right. It's war." Click. Damen ended the call, and he knew what came next. By midnight, it started. The first attack wasn't with bullets, it was money. The town's bank accounts froze. Small businesses found their loans denied. The city's funding mysteriously vanished. And the new police force? They were being investigated for mismanagement. By state officials Kane's people controlled. Harold Carter's shop, firebombed. The message was clear. The war wasn't over. Harold Carter stood in the wreckage of his auto shop, the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline thick in the air. He wasn't angry, he was ready. Damen stood beside him, scanning the blackened remains of the shop where he had grown up. "I should have known," Harold muttered. "You did," Damen said. "You taught me how to fight men like this." Harold's eyes darkened. "These men aren't like Blake and Anderson. They don't threaten with guns, they use power." Damen nodded. "Then I'll take their power away." Harold exhaled. "You're not Superman, son." Damen's eyes burned. "No," he said, "but I'm close." Damen didn't wait for the next attack. He launched his own. By dawn, he had activated his old network. Special forces contacts, intelligence operatives, deep cover assets. He tracked Kane's movements. He followed the money. And he found their weak point. They weren't politicians. They weren't gangsters. They were businessmen. And Damen Carter? He was about to break them. Vincent Kane sat in his office, staring at his phone. He hadn't slept, because the moment Damen vanished from the grid, things started happening. Offshore accounts? Frozen. Corporate records? Exposed. Secret investments? Gone. Someone was tearing their empire apart from the inside. And then, a message appeared on Kane's screen. "Your turn." Kane's hands trembled, because for the first time in his life, he felt hunted. Damen didn't stop. One by one, the men behind Milbrook's corruption fell. A state senator caught in a bribery scandal, a CEO exposed for funding criminal enterprises, a judge arrested for money laundering, and at the center of it all, Vincent Kane. Trapped, cornered, and waiting for the ghost to come for him. Milbrook wasn't just a town anymore. It was a message that justice wasn't bought, a message that power could be ripped away. And Damen Carter, he was the man who delivered it. But Kane wasn't done, not yet. Because when you can't win a war, you make it personal. 10:42 p.m. Harold Carter sat at his kitchen table, his old .45 Colt resting beside him. His hands were steady, because he knew what was coming. Outside, the wind carried a familiar stillness, the kind he'd known back in Vietnam before an ambush. Then, the power cut out. Harold sighed. Took them long enough. A shape moved in the dark, fast, silent, but Harold Carter was faster. Boom! A single shot shattered the silence. A body hit the floor. Then another. Harold grabbed his radio. "Damen, you there?" No answer. Something was wrong. Damen Carter woke up to darkness. His wrists burned. Metal cuffs. His head throbbed. Sedative. And the moment he tried to move, a fist slammed into his gut. He gritted his teeth. Didn't make a sound. A voice, smooth, calm, and full of satisfaction. "Welcome back, Colonel." Vincent Kane stepped into the dim light. Damen's eyes burned with cold fury. Kane smiled. "Oh, don't look so angry. I told you, Carter, you weren't just fighting dirty cops." Damen flexed his wrists, tested the cuffs. Too tight. Didn't matter. Kane leaned in. "You've caused a great deal of inconvenience, but now, it's over." Damen smirked. "That's what the last guy said." Kane's eyes darkened. "Oh, Colonel, you don't understand. This time, you lose." Then he lifted his phone, and Damen Carter saw the live video feed of Harold Carter, surrounded, outnumbered. Kane smiled. "I believe the phrase is checkmate." Damen's breath stayed steady. His mind raced. Find the weakness. Find the opening. Because if Kane thought this was checkmate, then he'd never played Damen Carter before. Back in Milbrook, Harold Carter stood in his living room, surrounded by 6 armed men. Their leader, a cold-eyed enforcer named Graves, smirked. "You should have stayed quiet, old man." Harold cracked his knuckles. "I'll stop when I'm dead." Graves chuckled. "That can be arranged." Then, a gunshot, but not from Graves. From outside. Then another. Then a scream. Graves stiffened. What the hell? The front door exploded inward, and through the smoke, Ryan Parker stepped in, gun raised, eyes burning. Graves turned too late. Ryan fired twice. Graves hit the floor, dead before he landed. The other men hesitated. Big mistake. Because behind Ryan came the ghost. Damen Carter moved like a shadow, a blur of violence. A blade flashed. A gun went off, and within 10 seconds, it was over. The last man, bleeding, shaking, tried to crawl away. Damen grabbed him by the throat. His voice was ice. "Where's Kane?" The man whimpered. I don't." Damen twisted. A crack. The man screamed. Damen whispered. "Last chance." Vincent Kane sat in his high-rise office, pouring himself a drink. The war was over. Carter was gone. His father, dead by now. The syndicate would rebuild. And then, the lights cut out. Kane's breath caught. Not possible. He grabbed his phone. Status? Static. His security feed glitched, then returned. And on every single screen in his office, one image. Damen Carter, standing in his lobby, holding Kane's last bodyguard, broken, bleeding. Kane's hand started shaking. Then his phone buzzed. An unknown number. Kane swallowed hard. Answered. Damen's voice was death itself. I told you, you should have run. Kane stood backing away from the door. Listen, Carter, Damen hung up. Then, the elevator dinged, the doors slid open, and Damen Carter stepped inside, gun raised, eyes cold. Vincent Kane? For the first time in his life, he begged. It didn't matter. Milbrook never heard what happened to Vincent Kane. Some said he fled the country. Some said Damen Carter let the feds handle it. Others, they swore they saw a black SUV abandoned in the desert, with a single ace of spades taped to the dashboard. Whatever the truth was, Milbrook was safe. The syndicate? Gone. Harold Carter stood outside his shop looking at the rising sun. Ryan Parker, now police chief, walked up. He's really gone? Ryan asked. Harold nodded. If Damen wanted him gone, then he's gone. Ryan exhaled. What now? Harold smirked. We rebuild. We watch. And we remember. He looked down the road. That the ghost never rests. Damen Carter drove down a lonely highway, heading west. A new town. A new fight. His phone buzzed. A message from Lieutenant Foster. New name. New problem. Looks like the syndicate's not finished yet. Damen smirked. Good. Because neither was he. Some men fight for a country. Some men fight for money. Damen Carter? He fought for justice. And as long as bullies in suits and badges existed, the ghost would never stop.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.